Senator, before we talk about what's going on in Russia, I'd love for you to just reflect a little bit on Madeleine Albright. I know you knew her very well. Share a story with us about the Secretary of State.
She was an extraordinary person, and as you know, she was a great stateswoman, a national and international figure, but also a very warm person. When I first came to the Senate, she sort of adopted me, and I think it was because I had Ed Muskie's seat. And the story is that one of her first policy jobs at all as a young person was in Muskie's office as a legislative assistant. She was the first woman in that kind of job. And the funny story is that as she was leaving, they had a going away party, and Muskie, she told me this story. She said Muskie was trying to articulate her role in the history of the office, but he didn't get it exactly right. He said, "I want to thank Madeleine for bringing sex to our office."
Wow. Okay.
So anyway, she was an exceptional person, both as a
she got a kick out of that
as a national figure, international figure, but also just as a warm and extraordinarily thoughtful person. And her experience, I should mention, of course, she was a refugee.
Yes.
And that experience informed her policy, and she knew what dictatorship looked like, and continued her warning us of that possibility right up to the time of her death. I'll be there. Mika, I'm sure, is going to be there this morning at the cathedral for her service. It's a great loss to the country.
Well, great loss to the country, and of course, we sit there. You're telling that story, fascinating. There's so many ways she was a trailblazer, whether it was in Ed Muskie's office or as Secretary of State. But like major figures, women who are major figures, like Thatcher, like Lagarde, you could name so many other leaders. She wasn't a woman who was Secretary of State. She was a Secretary of State who happened to be a woman.
Exactly.
When we look back at her, we don't go, "Oh, what a wonderful American story about a woman." No, we just think, hey, that was a tough leader, and we were blessed as a nation to have her on the front lines of the fight for freedom throughout her entire life. Speaking of the fight for freedom, let's talk about, Senator, I'm curious what your reaction is. Let's talk about not only the robust weapons package that the allies just agreed to send, but also talk about this new arrangement where you have Secretary Austin leading a coalition that's going to meet once a month to assess how they can best help the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian fighters. It seems we're moving into yet another phase. And once again, I will say it, the Biden administration and NATO allies are coordinating in a way, again, that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I don't think the administration and the president have gotten enough credit for putting together one of the most amazing coalitions in recent world history and holding it together. Winston Churchill once said, the only thing harder than fighting with your allies is fighting without your allies. And it's hard to hold something like this together. 30, 35 countries have done an amazing job. The administration, Tony Blinken, has done an amazing job of bringing these various people with different interests and different backgrounds. And by the way, I think there was some talk earlier in your program about the extraordinary 180-degree change in German foreign policy as a result of this invasion, but also the leadership that I think Joe Biden and the administration has provided. That 40-country meeting yesterday was something that I don't recall ever seeing anything quite like that, and it's one of Putin's many miscalculations to underestimate both NATO, Joe Biden, the West generally, and now cutting off oil and gas to Poland, I think, is another miscalculation. John McCain used to say that Russia is nothing but a gas station with an army. And now they're not even going to be a gas station. I think they may end up really regretting that as the Europeans find ways to replace the energy that they've been getting from Russia. This is a signal to the rest of Europe: you better not depend on Russia for your energy supply.
Right. That really, at this point, if we, meaning the West, NATO countries, everybody, don't realize that we got to get off that dependence now, what's going to teach? But Katty Kay, a gas station with an army that's not doing very well, that's losing generals, losing warships, losing on many levels.
I was just thinking exactly the same as you. Not a great gas station, not a great army. No. It's looking like at the moment. And Senator, you're right, the Biden administration deserves an enormous amount of credit, and all the Europeans I speak to say there was a real sea change in the way America and the White House approached them over Ukraine. They approached them as allies. They spoke to them as allies. They shared intelligence with them as allies. And there was a real recognition in the White House that this coalition was going to work if the United States and Europe were in lockstep over things like sanctions and weapons supplies. So the coalition has held. It's in a very good position. The battle on the ground is working. The Ukrainians are taking this fight to the Russians in a way we didn't imagine. What worries you? What keeps you up? You look at intelligence all the time. You look at the armed services all the time. At this stage in the battle, 2 months in, what are the things that you're worried about?
Well, I think there are two things in there interrelated. What is Putin's next step? He's embarrassed. He must be. I wouldn't want to be in his inner circle right now. I mean, he's got to be just wild about the failure of all these miscalculations and the things that are not working. So what does he do? The history is in Chechnya and Syria, he bombs. He attacks civilians. He increases the pressure on the civilians in order to try to bring pressure on the government or on whatever group he's trying to destroy. So that's one possibility, and we're already seeing that. The other, of course, we don't like to talk about is nuclear weapons. And it's important to realize that Russia has a different view of nuclear weapons than we do, or than practically anybody else in the world. They view nuclear weapons as just part of their stockpile of weapons to use in a conflict. And they actually have a doctrine, which I'm sure you're familiar with, called escalate to de-escalate. And the idea is, if we're losing on the battlefield, we'll raise the stakes by using tactical nuclear weapons and dare our opponents to respond in kind. And that will, their theory is, de-escalate the conflict. They're losing on the battlefield. Now, they've always said they would only do that if the motherland was in danger. But Putin considers Ukraine and certainly Crimea part of the motherland. So this is what makes Putin, I think, the most dangerous single individual in history. He's a dictator. He's amoral. He has this fantasy of rebuilding the Soviet Union and that he's sort of the reincarnation of Frederick the Great, and he has nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Mike Barr.